Hello, welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Julia Dias Leite. I'm the CEO of the Brazilian Center for International Relations. It's a great honor to open the debate today about the government Biden and environment agenda. We have an honor to have here with us Ambassador Sergio Amaral, Minister Izabella Teixeira, who coordinates the environment program of CEBRI, and a great honor to have Tom Lovejoy. Thank you, Tom, to be here with us. Welcome. I will present now Tom and then pass to Ambassador Sergio Amaral. Tom Lovejoy is a biologist and founder of and president of a non-profit Amazon Biodiversity Center and the renewed biological dynamics of forests and fragments projects. He works in the Brazilian Amazon for over 4 decades now. He's also a professor at George Mason University and a senior fellow at the United Nations Foundation. Lovejoy holds a PhD degree from Yale University. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to participate in this debate. And I'll pass now to Ambassador Sergio Amaral to introduce the topic. Welcome, everyone. Ambassador.
Good evening, Julia. Good evening, Tom Lovejoy. Good evening, Izabella Teixeira. And I also greet all the people who follow us in this webinar. I'm very pleased to have Tom Lovejoy with us. He's a good old friend who have done many things together, mainly in the area of the environment and the Amazon. And I cannot forget your great contribution when the embassy in Washington decided to organize 1 week on the Amazon. And I remember that we had an event at the National Geographic, which gathered 450 people. I don't know whether the attraction was the Amazon or Professor Lovejoy or both, but even the president of the National Geographic was amazed by this event and of this panel. A second meeting that I remember quite well, and I'm very happy to remind, is a dinner in honor of Professor Lovejoy at a very prestigious club in Washington, the Cosmos Club, where it was a dinner on his honor. And after the dinner, he started a speech. And much to my surprise, it was on Brazil. It's not only in Brazil, but the achievements Brazil have made in the area of the environment in the last decades, and the contribution that Brazil had given to the environmental cause and movement. Now, we all in Brazil follow with much interest what's going on in the United States, the new Biden government, the centrality of the issue of the environment and climate change in the campaign, the centrality of these two issues in the future government, and also environment and climate change being one outstanding feature of the foreign policy of the Biden government. We, of course, have a lot of interest in understanding what is the approach, what is the vision of the new government on these issues. And we could not have someone better or more qualified to talk about these issues than Tom Lovejoy. We would like to understand, Tom, what is the message of the new government? What are the objectives of the Green New Deal? What is the foreign vision and the policies that may come? And what might be the impact of such policies and this vision on Brazil and on US-Brazilian relations. I'm very happy that you accepted this invitation, and I'm sure that you'll be able to give us a good contribution to better understand something that is very important for our both countries. Tom, it's up to you.
So thank you so much, Senor Embaixador. And it's also a delight to be doing this with my friend and colleague, Izabella. So one of the great advantages about the incoming Biden administration, just to begin with, is that he has got this very long record. He's very well understood. And one can see that already emerging in his appointment of John Kerry to be climate czar, for example. The immediate rejoining of the Paris Agreement, and perhaps of less interest to Brazil, but there will be a lot of reversals of things that the Trump administration did in terms of affecting environmental regulations in the United States in a way that is not good for the environment. So one of the really interesting things about President Biden is that when he was vice president, in other words, for 8 years, one of the priorities that Obama gave him was to be engaged on Latin America and the Caribbean. And he worked very consistently on that for 8 years. He worked very closely with the Inter-American Development Bank and Luis Alberto Moreno, has continued to consult with Luis Alberto about things that might be done going forward. So I think you will see a pro-Latin America, Caribbean element in foreign policy much stronger than has normally been the case for many administrations. So that I think is a given, and it's a real positive. But he is also, basically he understands the modern environmental agenda. He understands the need to really tackle climate change and transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources of energy. And of course, there are really interesting things to be learned from Brazil about renewable energy. That's a history that goes back, my goodness, 40 years or more. And one of the other really outstanding things about Biden is how much he listens. He does a lot of listening. He also does a lot of speaking, but in between, he's doing a lot of listening and a lot of learning. And, he is very interested in root causes. So thinking about Central America and the refugee problem, his first instinct is, what can we do to help those countries to improve their economic activities and the well-being of the people there, so there is not a big sort of impetus for them to pick up and leave. So he's very much of a problem solver. And I would fully expect, even though it may seem to be in the shadow of rebuilding Atlantic alliances and other global alliances, that there will be serious engagement with other countries in the Western Hemisphere from the very beginning. So I think that is a big positive. When it comes to climate change, of course, there's already talk of very comprehensive legislation in the House of Representatives, the so-called Green New Deal. What that actually will turn out to be in the end is, I think, anybody's guess at this point, but it will be a really strong legislative effort to transform the energy base in the United States. Big question, of course, are the two remaining Senate seats, the two from Georgia, which will have runoffs on the 5th of January, and they will determine which party has control of the Senate. If the Republicans retain control of the Senate, there is going to be, some difficulty in advancing legislation. But my guess would be that most members of the Senate, and for that matter, the House of Representatives, are tired of 4 years of antagonism and would like to look for ways to move at least some things forward. So on the Green New Deal, a lot of that, it will be about transforming the energy base. But anybody who looks at the global climate change challenge, and I've done 3 books on how all of that relates to the biodiversity of the planet. Anybody who looks at it knows that you cannot solve the problem without engaging what conservationists call nature-based solutions. So let me give you some statistics here, which will give you a sense of the challenge. So I think it is now increasingly understood that a world that is warmer than 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial temperatures is not going to be a world that is easy to manage biologically at all. So we really need to try and figure out how to end up at 1.5 degrees, which can be essentially a soft landing on climate change globally. The problem is we are already at CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere that are way beyond such a soft landing. So the only way we can get there is looking for things that can actually pull carbon back out of the atmosphere. And anybody who's actually looked at this really understands that climate change is, in the end, is a biological problem. All the fossil fuels are nothing but ancient biological productivity and photosynthesis, which has been trapped, geologically. And as fossil fuels now being released essentially in an instant into the atmosphere. So that's one of the big problems, of course, is ratcheting down on those kinds of emissions as soon as we can. And Brazil has, of course, provided really wonderful leadership on this over the years. But there also is a huge amount in the atmosphere from destroyed terrestrial nature. there is as much carbon in the atmosphere from destroyed terrestrial nature as survives in existing terrestrial nature. That's what the numbers come down to. Nobody's ever quite put it that starkly other than me so far, but that's what it comes down to. And the only way I see that we can, in the end, come to that soft landing is through some really aggressive ecosystem restoration around the world to bring about a third of that lost carbon from nature back into living ecosystems. And, everybody immediately thinks, oh, the Amazon, there's 100 billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere in the Amazon. We certainly don't want that going in the atmosphere. But, mangroves are incredibly important, for example, in terms of carbon sequestration. So there are many things that can be done in different kinds of habitats all around the world to restore some nature, get the benefits of the ecosystem services that come with that, and ward off what would otherwise be a frightening level of climate change. So that's the big picture globally. I'm not sure that the U.S. climate policy, as currently sketched out, actually gets that as much as they should. But you can imagine I will be working to make sure they do understand that. So beyond all of that, all of the remaining mega forests of the world are really important, both from a biodiversity point of view and as a reservoir of carbon that should stay in the living system and not add to the greenhouse gas problem and climate change. And so I am hoping that this administration will make some really pioneering moves in changing global financing to assist the nations that have those important forests in keeping them in ways that can benefit them economically, but does not end up with major carbon emissions to the atmosphere. I think once they're really engaged looking at the challenge, and we get through the next meeting of the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Change Convention, I think we'll be at a point where there'll be a global realization that we really have to manage nature and our relationship with nature in a much more constructive way. So I see this not as some kind of top-down situation where a set of nations simply impose that on others. I think it's got to develop in a deeply collaborative way. And with the kind of practicality that the Pepe G7 program for the Brazilian rainforests actually achieved. Sergio, you will remember those very well. They all came out of the G7 summit in Houston in 1990, and all the contributions ran through the World Bank, eliminating any sovereignty issue. And I think a lot of good practical things were done, including the demarcation of many of the indigenous reserves in the Brazilian Amazon. So I anticipate not only the need, but some success in moving in that direction in the next 4 years. So maybe I'm getting way ahead of where the Biden administration will be, on the 20th of January. But I think it's going to be hard for them not to look at that. And we similarly in the United States, we have similar issues to this. So we have a fairly pristine forest in southern Alaska, the Tongass forest, which the Trump administration basically put up for timbering. The amount of carbon in that forest is really large. I imagine that will be one of the first things the Biden administration will try to put back to where it was. I think it was a Clinton administration decision to keep it a roadless forest. And, in the end, the economics of it doesn't work very well if you actually harvest that forest. I've been up there, I've seen what happens. You basically, you go in and you clear cut and you sort of cream the goodies. And then what you have left surviving is pretty scrubby and not great forest at all. So I think you'll see this administration trying to do some things about forests in the United States, as well as trying to help with forest issues around the world. So far, looking at all of the Biden nominations, it is an incredibly talented and experienced group of people, whether it's Janet Yellen as Secretary of Treasury, or Antony Blinken at the State Department. It's a very encouraging collection of leaders, seasoned leaders who have been nominated. So I don't know, maybe I shouldn't keep going on any further, but maybe we can get down into specifics. It is very encouraging, despite the challenges, to see the kind of people and the kind of policies that are coming out of the Biden administration. And, it's almost like they've been studying this for 4 years, right? They're really building on a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom and thoughtfulness.
Tom, thank you. You finished your first presentation?
So I think we get further with questions, right?
Okay.
I think now Izabella, right?
I think now we're going to have a former minister, Izabella Teixeira, who's also a friend of Tom Lovejoy, also an outstanding leader of the environmental cause in Brazil. Izabella.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. First of all, I'd like to express how happy I am today to meet two good friends, Ambassador Sergio Amaral, that's my former boss. It's true. And also Tom Lovejoy, that's more than a good friend. I remember at the beginning of my career, first time that I saw, when I met Tom, it was in the meeting with Dr. Paulo Nogueira Neto, and Tom so young and you, and I was so impressed because I had the scientist from the United States that he was able to speak in Portuguese. I was fascinated. I remember this. It was my first impact, and since that, almost 35 years ago, we were together, and I'd like to say here that I'm really, I'd like to thank you, Tom, for everything that you did to work together with me during my term in the Ministry of Environment, and how friend you were with our causes and our projects, and also with your experience in Brazil. So, but I was here listening you carefully and thinking about the challenges that you have today, or that you have, or the good news that you can have for the environmental cause and for climate agenda, considering the President Biden administration. And I listened carefully, and I understand that you mentioned really key issues, highlighting the relationship between nature and climate. And indeed, we're discussing development and how humankind must learn that you need a new relationship between us and nature, because it's impossible to move on in this planet considering the patterns that you have for natural resource use, the pattern that you have to put pressure on biodiversity, the patterns that you have today to stress water resource, etc., etc., etc. It's absolutely what key to understand this. It is a powerful and strong message from science, okay? And more than this, scientists, they're becoming closer to the policymakers and also to private leaders to address solutions at the global level. And but to address solutions at the global level means to address local needs and national interests. And this is what I'd like to highlight here, that President Biden election means that we are looking for to bring domestic policies and how this will influence foreign policies, and also how we manage global interests considering global issues. Why? Because we cannot solve these problems alone. We need global partnerships, we need alliance, we need everybody together, not only the states, the governments, but also sites. And these are the big challenges that COVID crisis is showing to us, okay? And you need to face climate change, Paris Agreement implementation, exactly post-COVID crisis. This is really something very interesting to be considered, and more than this, to understand with the dynamics of the good news, in my personal perspective, to have President Biden elected, and more than this, to have John Kerry back. I had the opportunity to work with Mr. Kerry during the climate agreement negotiation, and what I'm saying is that really very good news. Okay, and we cannot forget that 2014, United States and China, and this is my first question, I will try to illustrate this to have the context, that to have a strategic bilateral agreement between China and the United States, exactly as part of the strategy of American strategy to reach Paris Agreement. In 2015, we have the same between United States and Brazil. And this is the case of Brazil. It was fully based on renewable energy. It's fascinating how indeed this, as what you mentioned, how Brazil can bring our experience and what it is, our knowledge, and also efforts, and also a common understanding of challenges concerning renewable energy. And after 5 years, exactly where we are today, to start Paris Agreement implementation, we have new conditions around the world. The geopolitical conditions are completely different, but what is good is that the United States is back. And it's back not only to have the leadership, the global leadership, is, as I mentioned before, consider the Paris Agreement trajectory, but also to bring domestic policies and American society engagement to climate action. And this means something really very interesting, in my personal opinion, because we cannot move based on action without the commitment of the society. And this is very, very important. And you have two different tracks, in the pessimist way or in the optimist way. And I hope that Americans can bring the optimist way. Of course, that you have to work hard, but I think that means there is something very important here to be highlighted. Our trajectory considered climate policies, meaning developed countries, but also in a country like Brazil, unfortunately, we are not achieved our targets this year, okay? And this is a powerful message for the society. we need trust and credibility, and should be based on delivery. And I think that it's important to act before to talk. This is a political message. When you go to the developed economies and show, oh, we want that, we need to do this, but we need to act before. And domestic policy means this. But we have the impact in international environment and international partners, and it's very important to try to bring these things together. And talking about international leadership, or how it will place the United States back at the head of the table, which are the new roles that the United States leadership will enable. Tell me if you think that on climate change, on climate agenda, you have nature-based solutions as you mentioned. But also, do you think that you can think about a partnership between China, European Union, United States as an alternative to tackle climate change or to put these impacts? Or you can try to understand better land use agenda, that means agriculture and also wood, supply chains, partnership, consider the three players, United States, European Union, and also China. Do you believe that if you can bring these players together, do you think that the efforts that President Biden will do exactly to bring people together, to bring these different clusters to a new cluster on climate change, that you can influence domestic behavior like sustainable consumption production, a new way to see nature-based solutions, considering how we can bring nature together, and also, as you mentioned, how we can indeed highlight or make strength the science role in this new trajectory. Because in 2022, you have IPCC report, and this report will be fully oriented to act. And so we are in the world in climate change that we need to manage three pillars: ambition, action, and international cooperation. How do you feel that Biden administration will bring domestic policies to influence international cooperation, and also to mobilize another partners and influence our bilateral cooperation between Brazil and the United States? And of course, my second round, if I have time, I will talk about Amazonia, because I know that everybody wants to discuss Amazonia, but I'm very curious consider your impressions. Exactly, if you have the same arrangement, we have an innovative one, but we'll try to play together exactly because Mr. Biden knows a lot about international cooperation and not a lot about climate change and environmental issues. Thank you very much, and be welcome, my dear friend.
So one of the challenges after 4 years is to actually restore the capacity of government, whether it's the Department of State or whatever agency we're talking about. That said, it's very clear that Biden has a very healthy respect for and understands the need for science-based solutions. I fully expect that could even be in his inaugural address. And as I like to say, you know, the root word of science is the verb to know. Right? It's been very strange to be in Washington when science is being disrespected left and right. So I think that will be one element we'll see. We'll also see trying to build back the capacities of the UN Foreign Service. And in the interest of international relations, it will move from a situation where, you know, we seem to have been throwing tariffs at countries left and right as our way to move forward, as opposed to actually having ongoing conversations about what some of the desirable solution-based possibilities are going forward, having real conversations about those kinds of things. So it's a lot on the president's plate and on the new administration's plate. But I think what really encourages me is sort of the experienced leaders he has been picking for his nominees. So these are people who understand government and how their particular part of it works, whether it's the economy or foreign policy. And we'll see who he chooses for some of the environment agencies. But having chosen John Kerry as the climate czar, that sends a really strong signal about science-based approaches to solving really big problems. So, you know, every day is a new set of names in the newspaper as to, but they're coming at a, you know, at a regular pace. So I think, you know, within a week or so, we'll have a pretty good understanding of the outline of the leadership of most of the government agencies and the important posts. And that says to me that actually there's been a lot of thinking going on, maybe in the lockdown situation, but a lot of thinking going on about what all the policies should actually be going forward. So if he's allowed to get his nominees in office, I think this is an administration which will hit the ground running, to use that metaphor, more than most administrations have in the past, because he's brought real experience into his choices. And, you know, there's not one I've heard anybody complaining about yet. Maybe people would like him to be bolder. That's a good question. You know, and certainly one could have criticized the Obama administration for not having been as bold as it might be. But from what I get of the sense of this country right now, he is exactly singing the right notes. You know, this is a country that basically is really tired of the last 4 years and the way it actually proceeded. You know, there are people who have been riled up and made angry, and that's a serious problem to deal with going forward. But they weren't enough to prevent Biden's election. And so that's a very good sign.
Tom, before we move to the Amazon, and I think Izabella has a question, I would like you to compare, if you can, the Green New Deal, which is proposed by the Biden team. New Deal, we know what it is the state, but the green you have explored already. If you could compare that with what in Europe they call the green recovery. If we listen to what the European Commissar mentioned about that, it's a very ambitious problem, because it comprehends not only investments, but it's also culture, it's aesthetics, it's a new Bauhaus. is it possible to compare whether both countries go in the same direction? Because I'm convinced if you have the United States and Europe together, this is a unique opportunity for the climate change cause.
So my sense is that the green recovery in Europe may be even more practical than all the elements in the Green New Deal. But that said, you know, there is mutual reinforcement between the two, which I think is the point of your question. You know, if the Senate allows something along the lines of the Green New Deal to go forward, then I think the potential for really reinforcing collaboration between Europe and the United States on these issues could be quite encouraging. And, you know, it's so obvious to anybody who's really thought about it that the economic blow from the COVID-19 actually creates an opportunity to rebuild in better and more sustainable ways. And I think there's certainly understanding of that in what is being proposed in Europe. I think maybe there's less of an element of that in the way the Green New Deal was thought through. But in the end, it could converge and amount to very much the same thing.
Izabella, I think
Okay.
you have a question on the Amazon.
Of course, that to discuss Amazon with Tom, probably we need a new webinar because he knows a lot. But I will try to provoke here, Tom, exactly connecting climate change and biodiversity. Indeed, what you have today, how we can use this new momentum of the United States to try to work together and more to do this, to address solutions for this unsustainable situation that we have today, considering Amazonian forests. We are losing the forest for the environmental crime, and deforestation put pressure on the biome. And not only in Brazil, you have this problem in all the biomes, okay? And the conflicts between national interests and sovereignties emerged to blur the debate. Because as you mentioned, we in the past, remember that in 1988, we have a similar crisis with Amazon today, as we have today. I think that in that time worse because the rate of deforestation was so high. And you have a different reaction from Brazilian government. And it was very important, the role of diplomacy in this decision. And when Brazil took a decision to invite the world to come to Brazil to discuss solutions. And indeed, Brazil hosts Rio Plus 20 conference, but also we negotiate PPG7. And in PPG7 was the first, it was a pilot program that indeed support Brazil to develop public policies and also national capacity to address solutions in Amazonia. It's very interesting to remember these times because we used to have our practice based on the forest, Atlantic forests, other biomes in Brazil, and the National Environmental Program in partnership with the World Bank was established before, but in Amazonia, it was the first step, and international cooperation was absolutely key in such a way that Brazil could move forward. What you have today is exactly that we need to face a backsliding in deforestation combat. More than this, you have the rise of deforestation in Brazil, and nobody can understand what's happened, even myself, because I know a lot about this. But I think that it's very important one of the measures that we have today is go through supply chains and bring private players, private actors to work together. But the law enforcement issue is absolutely important because we manage crimes, organized crime, environmental crime, et cetera, that everybody knows about this. Do you think what do you think indeed, considering international cooperation, an innovative way to bring the countries of the Amazon basin together, if the idea to have a task force on environmental crime under the leadership of Amazon countries is something that to have an appeal to manage better international and national conflicts that indeed doesn't make sense in my personal opinion. And what do you think about an alliance between or among Europe, China, and United States to address supply chains, land use agenda, meaning agriculture and timber? These are two important issues because I know that people, they are discussing this. And another side of the coin, because if not, Ambassador Sergio, so Izabella is not talking about sustainable development, but of course that Amazonia, Brazilian Amazonia, it's absolutely key for development, and we need to bring solution. In my opinion, Amazonia should be the Brazilian green recovery benchmark. Okay, it's a process, but we need to have this ambition. If you go, you need to stop the backslide, the degradation, but you need to go into the future. And for this, you need the new green economies, you need investments, we need connectivity, digital investments, et cetera, et cetera. People, Amazon people want growth, development. Okay, they need this. It's fair. Okay, and you need to understand how to address solution, considering how we can build on basic conservation and not to try to frozen everything, say that you don't have problem there. So do you believe that the new framework for international cooperation, that you can have a new framework for international cooperation for Amazon, that you need to have, as Ambassador, yesterday you have an article from Ambassador Bedenu saying that you have alternative diplomacies. It's a momentum that in Brazil that you need to move beyond what you used to play, and have different players, different actors trying to bring solutions. Private sector, financial sector, the initiative of private banks in Brazil, join everybody to propose alternative for Amazonia. Do you believe that you can have an open dialogue with the United States and the other international partners to discuss an innovative platform for international cooperation based on Amazonia sustainable development and how Brazil can address national interests based on this? Two questions, one enforcement and deforestation, another one, if you can use conservation as an asset to promote sustainable development in Brazil and bring indigenous people, of course, together. Thank you.
So I think what's so interesting about the question you raised is that compared to the 1990s, the understanding of how the Amazon works is much greater. And I mean that how it works as an actual physical and biological system. And it's all actually wonderful Brazilian science, but the hydrological cycle of the Amazon, makes half of the rainfall of the Amazon. And it's all because of what trees do and what leaves do. And so at a certain point, too much deforestation causes that to degrade. And we're seeing that right now in the southern and eastern Amazon. Seeing that in the every 5 years or so, unprecedented historic droughts, longer dry seasons, warmer temperatures. And so one of the things that actually needs to be done and started quite soon is to do some serious reforestation in the Amazon to restore that hydrological cycle so that it has more of a margin of safety. So that's protecting the Amazon as a system. That is not solving the problem of sustainable development. And, you know, looking back over the years, I think most of the things that were done from an economic perspective in the Amazon really were not very successful. And one of the reasons is that it's such a big region, it's hard to actually get something going at scale. And I think the one recent major exception to that is the acai, you know, which you can now buy in supermarkets, you know, where I live. It's a global export product of Brazil. So I think there are probably some other opportunities like that, which could be brought to scale. And I'm thinking particularly of aquaculture. I mean, who does not love tambaqui? You know? So aquaculture has actually gotten going in some places. It's increased the economic product of Acre by at least 5%. But it's a long way from having that happening in Acre and some other places in Brazil, happening in the Peruvian Amazon, to it coming up to scale and being marketed and supplied around the world, to the point where I believe you could successfully get it to be as well known as salmon or cod. And it's just a matter of figuring out some kind of financing and support system that could get all of that going. So I think there are a number of low-hanging fruits, as they say, like that. And on the 11th of July, the Leticia Pact formally requested the Inter-American Development Bank to create a 10-year initiative for a sustainable Amazon. So there's a formal request to the Inter-American Development Bank to do that. The good thing about being an initiative of the bank is that it is freestanding. The funds come from other places than the normal funding of the bank, and so they are protected. So you could actually have a sustained decade of technical assistance and financial assistance, engagement with finance ministers, to move in that sustainable development direction. There's also a lot of other things that can be done. And, you know, Governor Helder Barbalho, in his remarks about 2.5 weeks ago, I thought actually had a pretty good vision for the state of Pará, in which, as he said, we don't need to cut another tree to improve cattle production. We should protect the forests we have. We should find ways to have sustainable products produced from the land that go into global markets. And he said we should invest in research into our biodiversity for finding new economic opportunities. And I think there is huge potential in that. It could be, an Amazon Basin initiative to create an MIT for the Amazon, or take something like IMPA and build it there. But make sure to do it in collaboration with industry so that whatever is found that is promising, like a new fungicide, can be brought to market at scale. Too many of these things, get discovered and they just sit on the scientific shelf. And people like me like to talk about them, but actually getting them to market requires collaboration with industry. So I think some serious discussions with industry and science ministries could lead to some really important advances. And, again, talking about taking things to scale, ecotourism in the Amazon is really poorly developed. There's so much that could be brought to making the Amazon, which is a destination name in itself, actually have a whole set of opportunities for ecotourism rather than the small number that currently exist. And that actually brings me to the national parks, right? So actually developing the national parks for ecotourism, if done thoughtfully and carefully, could be another way to bring sustainable income to the Amazon. And it always sounds like hand waving when one says that, but when one looks at how it works in some countries like Costa Rica, it's a really serious industry. It's not the only solution, but it is something that is relatively easy to develop and bring to scale. And so people would come to the Amazon, and instead of going to one place and then going home, they might go to 3 or 4 places over a couple of weeks and get very different experiences, and support local economies that way. And then I remain fascinated by what goes on in Manaus. Yes, the economic free zone makes a lot of that possible. I view it as a payment for the ecosystem services of maintaining Amazonas, mostly in forest. But what's actually happened in Manaus is really interesting because most of the factories are assembly factories. And what they put together does not draw on materials from the forest. It brings the pieces together to build a cell phone or to build a Harley Davidson or whatever. And those are really important economic opportunities for people. So there is, imperfect as it may seem, there is a relationship between the economic productivity of Manaus. When it goes up, deforestation in Amazonas goes down. So thinking about sustainable cities in the Amazon, I think, is a really important part of the solution. It's also something the Inter-American Development Bank would love to get engaged with. Because, as I like to say, until there's a decent quality of life in cities in the Amazon, there will be no sustainable Amazon.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tom. I think it's time to move to the questions, mainly
Yeah.
because I know that one of them is by Ambassador Recupero, who likes, Izabella likes to say, he was my boss and introduced me to the environment and put me at the negotiation of the PPG7, as you reminded us. So, Julia, that's up to you now.
So should we start with Ambassador Recupero question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we have a selection of questions here that members of our board and fellows sent to us. And I'll start with Ambassador Rubens Recupero. His question is, what kind of scientific cooperation measures might be taken by Biden to promote the sustainable use of Amazon biodiversity to the benefit to the local population? And do you see the engagement of private sector, NGOs, and scientific research institutions for both countries?
So I don't at this point know anything what they're thinking about that, but I think it would be more than possible to actually create an initiative along the lines that Ambassador Recupero was just outlining, in which there was essentially a collaboration between the United States and Brazil, once again, including industry, but doing it in a way that protects Brazilian industry, so the profits don't just immediately go off into some international destination and not contribute to sustainable development. I mean, it's a really sound vision. It requires certain investment in science on both sides, and some very careful thinking about how to protect the intellectual property rights. But that's a lot easier to do than it was 30 years ago. Most of the ground rules on access and benefit sharing have been pretty well hammered out internationally. And so rather than have to spend a lot of time negotiating all of that, that's mostly been done. And it's just time to get on with the science and to do it with a very practical outlook of trying to find opportunities that can turn into real sort of economic powerhouses.
Thank you. So I have a question following up to Ambassador Sergio Amaral's question, who comes from Clarissa Lins, who is a senior fellow of our energy program. In a context of growing climate ambitions from the European Union and China, do you believe the US will recover its global climate leadership?
So I think the choice of John Kerry as climate czar signals a very strong intention to do that. You know, what a Republican-dominated Senate might do to limit that is an open question. But let's hope that the January 5 elections eliminate that issue. Right? Anyway, I think there's a lot that can be done, a lot.
So also I continue to Kerry's appointment, Anna Toni, as Executive Director of Institute for Climate and Society. And her question is, how do you analyze the impact of Kerry's appointment to lead the climate agenda in regards to US trade, security, and defense policies?
So I imagine that as climate czar, it will basically be an appointment like a cabinet appointment, but in a sense, even broader. So if John Kerry decides on subject number one that he wants to involve 3 different departments of the federal government, his position will allow him to convene that discussion and try and figure out really good ways forward.
A question from Daniela Lerda, who's also a fellow of CEBRI and coordinates the Ford Foundation Brazil. How do we promote the economic protection of forests while overcoming the opportunity costs of activities that currently drive deforestation?
So that's a very serious question. I could spend all the remaining time on it, but let me say, no, I don't think Brazil should be expected to do all that's needed to be done to protect those forests without some assistance from the rest of the world. They're just too important for how the climate system works. And in the end, simply sort of paying rent, as it were, is not sufficient in itself, because one actually has to address the causes of deforestation. And more often than not, that involves thinking about sustainable alternatives for the people who otherwise are destroying the forests in very sort of short-term advantage.
Izabella, would you like to comment any of the questions? Your audio.
Here. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. I think that we have some important message here from Tom, and several 2 or 3 things that I'd like to comment. We need solutions for Amazonia, sustainable development solution, because we need to have development. We need to understand that to have different Amazonias when you mention Amazonia in Brazil. As Amazon used to say, Beto Veríssimo, you have 4 different Amazonias, and the degraded areas or consolidated degraded areas that to have one dynamic. The mobile frontier for deforestation, you have another dynamic. And to go to the preserved forest regions, you have another dynamic, and you have urban Amazonia. So when you go to discuss Amazonia, it's a wicked problem. You have conflict narratives, you have different interests, etc., etc. But as Tom mentioned, we have really good experience with PPG7, and we need to understand what scale means in Amazonia, because it's a continent, okay? And this is not easy to discuss this, because nobody understands. Even when I go to Amazonia, I think, come on, what is this? Because it's impressive, really impressive. It's a Brazil in Brazil. It's more than a half of our territory. And with a diversity of situations, of populations, of communities, we have more 240 languages that people speak in Amazonia. It is unbelievable, the diversity that we have there. So when you go to discuss this, it's very important that we take care to compare other situations in Brazil. Agriculture is a good example, because when you go into bioeconomy, like acai that you mentioned, and you have a huge production and you have international market, but you cannot compare this with other crops in Brazil. And we need to understand that the markets, how we can manage this, we need to propose to have bioeconomy development, use science and preserve the forest, but also to discuss scale. It's absolutely important to discuss infrastructure, for example, or digital connectivity in Amazonia. Amazonia is an isolated territory. It's true. Go there. Try to contact. Try to connect. Try to do business. Go on the ground to do business there. It's different. It's completely different. And this is an asset, in my opinion. We need to understand the reality. And I hope that we can be together with President Biden administration to discuss global issues, but based on realities and concrete solutions that sometimes don't necessarily have a large scale, but it's very important for regional development. It's very important for local needs, and even for ecotourism. I'm a fan of ecotourism, but come on, you have to take a boat. You need 8 days to arrive at the place and go to have 8 days to do this. And we have, but Sebastião Salgado has, but not the other one sometimes. We need to understand what it means in Amazonia. And that's why I think that you have, in this moment in Brazil, a particular situation to debate Amazonia, bring all the players into the room, as I like to say, because you have private sector, financial sector, Amazonians fully engaged to discuss your destinies. This is very, very important, and you cannot go into the past, back to the past with a negative experience, or try to promote this based on deforestation. This doesn't make sense, as the governor of Pará is looking forward to address, but it's really, really a huge task. And my second comment is that science, it's more than a partner. It's absolutely key, because we need science-oriented action. But what it is, we need to highlight the importance of science, because not only for Amazonia, for the global, for all the planet. The impacts of Amazonia deforestation, it's impressive. I saw good work last year in the scientific work, and last year in Princeton. I think that you know this about this, that the modeling shows what happens in the world if you cut 50% of Amazon forest. And it's impressive what's happened around the world. But the political question is not only this. You need the other side. What happened to the world if Brazil takes decision to preserve Amazonia? And what indeed it means for not only for the atmosphere, for the biodiversity agenda, et cetera, but what it means for Brazil and what it means for the international community. So my feeling, Tom, is that you have a huge opportunity to have, to strengthen our bilateral cooperation between America and the United States, because I used to remember that in 1991, in 1988, when we have the crisis in Amazonia, you have fires and deforestation, and have 992, the conflict. But in 1991, you have the first memorandum of understanding between Brazil and Forest Service in the United States to promote strategies and also capacity building for Brazil combat fires in forests. It's impressive. Until 90s, Brazil didn't know anything about fires in forests. And you have the huge, 30 years later, we used to have a huge capacity to go against this based on science and international cooperation in the United States, international cooperation with Americans. I renewed this agreement when I was minister. It was fascinating how you can bring things together. I do believe that you can have this opportunity to scale up our commitments, but more than this, our vision. It's impressive. I think it's very important to how we can be closer between the two societies to have an innovative vision. As Sergio mentioned, if you bring together the United States and the European to tackle climate change, imagine what's happening. You can bring together the United States, Brazil, and the European countries to tackle climate change. It will be amazing that you can bring biodiversity together with climate change in concrete ways, showing that you can make the difference in a positive direction. So on the comments, and thank you very much for your comments, for ideas, and I'm sure that I will call you back to explore another opportunity, another alternatives to be together in this new momentum, not only in the world, but meaning for us in the environmental agenda. Thank you, Tom.
Julia, before we close, I would like to make a comment on a matter that was raised by both Izabella and Tom. And I think that one of the problems we have with the Amazon is that we don't know exactly what we want from the Amazon. We lack a sense of appropriation. We have to feel the Amazon. Amazon is ours in the sense that is a big and important asset of the country. And we see the Amazon as something far away and under the threat of foreigners. And I think this is wrong. We have to think about the Amazon as something that we own. and we have the responsibility of protecting. And we have also the responsibility of finding out the appropriate initiatives and the appropriate policies to develop the Amazon. In this sense, I think that you both mentioned an important thing, is we are not the only Amazonian country. There are many other Amazonian countries. And it's very important we talk to each other to see whether our views and our vision and our objectives coincide. Because we already have a diplomatic infrastructure or a diplomatic agreement to develop the Amazon. And this would be very important, as you mentioned, that we can have a comprehensive view of the potential of this region and that we can take care of together. It would be, furthermore, a very important political development at a time in which we have also the responsibility in promoting development to the regions which are at the northern part of the country. I'd like to thank you, Tom, very much for your presence. Izabella, as always, very good comments. And I think we'll need perhaps a new webinar to follow up on this one, because there are many open and very good questions. Julia, for you to close.
Thank you so much. Tom, would you like to make a last comment?
Well, I guess it's been a great conversation, and we've just begun the discussion, and there's a lot to do. And I could not imagine people I would rather be doing it with than the ones I've just been talking with. So thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Sorry for the participants. We had a lot of questions receiving, but we run out of time. And so thank you so much, Professor, to be here with us, Ambassador Sergio Amaral, Minister Izabella Teixeira. It was a great debate. As you said, it's just the start.
Very much, Julia. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Obrigada, Tom. Beijo para você. Tchau.
Tchau.
Tchau, Sérgio. Tudo de bom.
Tchau, Izabella.
Obrigado. Gostei muito dos seus comentários.
Obrigado
Vamos
a você.
conversar. Beijo. Tchau.